Hello, hello, welcome. We could all just find our seats. How's everyone doing? Politifest? How fun has it been? Come on. Better. Yeah, Politifest. Well, welcome to this year's Politifest 2024, Can Our Government Meet the Moment? I'm Andrea Lopez Villafana, and I'm the managing editor at Voice of San Diego. In case you're not familiar with Voice of San Diego, we're a nonprofit investigative news organization committed to holding public officials accountable and giving you, the public, the information you need to be advocates for good government. As a nonprofit, we depend on members, donors, and sponsors like you to make our work possible. So just you being here in these seats is a lot of help. So thank you for your support. I'd like to take a minute to recognize our sponsors who help make Politifest possible. A special thanks to the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego for being our partner for a 7th year. Our thanks also to the Sycuan Band of the Kumeyaay Nation, the United Domestic Workers Union, AARP, the San Diego Foundation, Business for Good, Hitski Development, the San Diego Municipal Employees Association, the Asian Business Association, Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest, Atlantis Group, SD Art Matters, and Southern California Rental Housing Association. We'd also like to recognize KPBS and iNewsSource, our partners at Public Matters. We're partnering to share content, conversation, and events like Politifest to ensure that all San Diegans understand their opportunity to participate in the democratic process and what it means more than voting in an election. A special thanks to the San Diego Foundation and the United Domestic Workers for sponsoring this specific session. Please welcome Smith Surisakorn from United Domestic Workers to say a few words about their organization.
Good afternoon. My name is Smith Surisakorn, and I'm with the United Domestic Workers, UDW. We are a union of caregivers of older adults, people with disabilities, and children here in our region. I am the special assistant to the executive director, Doug Moore, and it is so good to be here with all of you today to celebrate politics here in San Diego. I wanted to briefly talk to you all about two things: who we are and why we're here. So UDW represents around 200,000 caregivers throughout the state of California, about 40,000 of whom live here in San Diego. We're your neighbors, friends, and family. We've taken one of our community's most important and critical jobs, and we take great pride in doing so. Unfortunately, we're also grossly underpaid. Here in San Diego, one of the most expensive areas in our country, we make $18.50 an hour. The MIT Living Wage Calculator indicates that for a single person with no children, the living wage should be $29.54. You don't need to go to MIT to know that we're nowhere close to meeting that number. This leads to why we're here. As folks at the forefront of keeping people in their homes and making sure our most vulnerable don't end up on the streets, we know politics is a mechanism through which change happens. We're here because we want to support the work that Scott and Andrea and the entire team are doing to hold government accountable in their promises to meet the moment. We, our membership and leadership, are here for the same reason many of you are here, to educate ourselves on what is happening in our communities. Issues like Prop 5 that we're about to discuss are going to have huge impacts on our lives. So, with Election Day, November 5th coming up, I wanted to say that we don't have to all agree on the myriad of issues that we're discussing here today, but surely we can agree that our democracy and civic engagement are critical to the future of our country. So as a big West Wing fan, no matter who you vote for, please make sure you vote. And the United Domestic Workers would love to congratulate the Voice of San Diego on another great Politifest. Thank you.
Thank you, Smith. And now I'll introduce our wonderful moderator, Joey Safchik.
Hi, I'm Joey Safchik. I'm the political reporter at NBC San Diego. Very excited to be here. I think we can all agree that West Wing is a great show and that our panelists have great socks. and that might be the extent of what we agree on here today, but we'll figure it out from there.
We both drive EVs now that I've bought.
Okay, look at that.
So we agree on that too.
We agree.
He was tired of paying the gas tax, so.
And we agree that filling
Think about that. That's good. I did get out of paying the gas tax, right?
So we agree that filling 75 minutes on one prop might be a little bit of a challenge. So we encourage you to ask good questions and send them our way. And on that note, let's introduce our panelists. We have Assemblymember Chris Ward.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you for being here. And we have Senate Minority Leader Brian Jones.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Both of whom represent districts within San Diego in the State House in Safchik.
Actually, in Chris's district right now.
Just a stone's throw away from yours, so.
So we'll go to you for dinner recommendations.
Anytime.
Okay, so what is Prop 5? Like so many propositions that we see on our ballots, it can be a little bit convoluted upon first reading. You might read it and feel like you have to go back to like 7th grade English comprehension. But we're going to hopefully send you out of here today understanding what it is and perhaps how you're going to vote for it so that you can go and educate your friends. I think we have a new slide. Okay, great. So Prop 5 allows local bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure with 55% voter approval. As it stands now, that needs a supermajority, which is 66% voter approval. So what the ask is here is to lower that threshold to 55%. So here you go. When a city or county wants to borrow money, we call that bonds. They need to get voter approval. You've all probably voted on that before. They put it on a ballot measure, and again, they need 66% voter approval. One more slide. So what would Prop 5 change? It would lower that threshold to 55%, and then it would be used for affordable housing projects for low and middle income Californians and for public infrastructure. That includes roads, parks, police stations, public safety investments. One more slide, please. But not so fast, opponents say, and I will let Brian get into this in a minute, but the nonpartisan state legislative analyst's office says that the borrowed funds would be repaid with higher property taxes, and that has a lot of people doing a double take. The amount of increased borrowing would depend on the ask by local governments, so each time a bond is put forth before voters, you have to determine and assess how much property taxes might need to go up to repay that bond. That's not something that Prop 5 addresses right off the bat. So the question that we're hoping to address here is how easy should it be to raise taxes for your local government to borrow money, and what kind of impact does that have on you as a property owner? Okay. Just a couple more points of context. California homes are about twice as expensive as the typical U.S. home. That also comes from the legislative analyst's office. 30% of renters in San Diego spend half of their paycheck on rent. That is a lot. If Prop 5 passes, it does apply to bonds that are on the ballot this year. And then there is oversight built into Prop 5. So it does include accountability structures that are built in. Also, the threshold for school bonds has already been lowered to 55%. That happened a while ago. I miss anything?
That was very fair.
Okay, thank you. We try. We do our best. Okay, so let's get into this discussion. First of all, can you tell us all where you stand on Prop 5 and why? And we will try to make this less intense than like a high school debate, because those are very scary.
No, thank you, Joey. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And for those online, happy to give, the support position, as I was a co-author on ACA 1 and a few other measures that have brought you now Proposition 5. To put this question really before the voters, I think it's an accurate statement to say, how easy should it be to raise taxes, right? That is an accurate statement, but it's equally as accurate to say, how difficult should it be to be able to fund community infrastructure? And that's what we're running up against. I think you all know I had the privilege of being able to serve on the San Diego City Council for a number of years before this opportunity to be at the State House. And it was incredibly difficult as we saw our infrastructure deficit grow, as we saw our tools in our toolbox limited. And we even tested some questions I'll probably talk about, a little bit later, about putting ideas before the voters, but for this 2/3 vote threshold that we knew is the requirement to be able to get things passed is just subverting local government's opportunities to be able to decide for themselves what they want to see happen in the form of affordable housing or being able to correct some of that infrastructure deficit that we have. So connecting it to what we've already done as voters back in the year 2000 for school facilities, it was a natural extension to say, look, if a threshold is good enough for school facilities, I think it should be good enough for community facilities as well, and I want to include affordable housing in that because of the crisis that we're in.
I think that's a fair point. We could have called this session a couple of different titles. We could have posed a few questions. What do you think Prop 5 at its crux is about?
Well, I'm going to start where Assemblymember Ward ended in talking about the school district bond threshold being lowered to 55% in 2000. And if you're paying attention to the media, which I know all of you are because that's why you're here, and if you look at the history of the school districts in San Diego County and specifically San Diego Unified and their success rate with their bonds and the accountability and how they've spent that money, there's been lots of coverage on mismanagement of those funds, there's embezzlement of those funds, waste of those funds. And so that argument might actually make the argument against Proposition 5. What Proposition 5 does at its core is give politicians, political consultants, and wealthy Wall Street bankers more access to your money. It makes it easier for them to come into your pocket and take the cash out of your pocket and put it into the general fund of either the city or the special district. And we should be just as concerned about cities as we are special districts. A special district is a fire. If you live in an area that has a fire district, or we all live someplace that has a water district, or any other kind of district where you're electing the board of directors, they will have access through Prop 5 to increase your property taxes. Now, what that means specifically is there will be an additional line on your property tax bill every twice a year when you pay your property tax, with a expenditure to repay these bonds that local district took out. Now, look, if you're a renter, like lots of people in San Diego are, you're still a property tax. Everybody pays property tax one way or another. So if you're a renter, whoever owns that apartment or house or wherever it is that you live, there is a property tax added to that cost of that piece of property. And as property taxes go up, your rent increases at the same rate or even sometimes at a higher rate. So I'm a no on Prop 5 because I believe that the governments in California currently have enough money. They just need to prioritize better how they're spending it and make these core functions of government the priority first before their pet projects. Let's fund core priorities of government first and avoid raising our property taxes.
Do you agree that there is enough money, enough revenue right now to tackle these projects?
No, it's right in front of you on an annual basis as you're reviewing as a city your ability to meet the need. And we see that infrastructure backlog grow. We know that billions of dollars that the city is behind in being able to meet its basic needs on stormwater, on providing adequate police, fire, park and library facilities, street repair. So one of the challenges that we had here, and I remember back to one of the efforts that I really tried to work on the last year I was on city council, is putting these questions before the voters and saying it's up to them if we do want to pay more altogether. And for a housing bond, because we know that is the biggest crisis that many argue we are facing as a community, that was something that we had designed to be able to support $900 million. Yes, it is like school bonds tied back to a property tax. So when you get that bill, you see the community college district, San Diego Unified. I want to come back to that in a second because I don't think that the fraud and the characterization I think was as fair as Senator had made it. But we use that as an opportunity then to be able to meet the public's demands, and that's what's always coming at us. And to say that there's this wild, wasteful spending and all this fraud that's going on, I'm telling you, we're meeting our operational needs to the best that we can. And then what? And then what more can we do to be able to solve the questions that are coming at council members to say, why isn't my community getting anything? And you say, well, here's the budget, and it's basically maxed out for what we have right now. Now, the good thing about Proposition 5 is accountability. There is a required expenditure plan. It cannot go to salaries. This isn't about backfilling something that should be the responsibility of a general fund. There needs to be oversight for a citizens commission that looks at all the projects that were promised to the voters to make sure we're on time and on task with those projects, and a review by the state auditor, no other structure that we put forward, including some of the school bond governance measures, requires such a high level of accountability. So we believe that has tightened up the question as best as we could to be able to offer something fair for voters to be able to consider when we are talking about moving a threshold from 2/3 to 55%.
Do you feel that the supermajority threshold is undemocratic, that a third of voters can shoot down a project that 65% of voters may want, as we have seen?
I do. There was another measure that we did not move forward on this year's ballot that is going to be on the 2026 ballot, but it addresses supermajority questions because some have tried to be able to raise the bar even higher, and that is undemocratic. Even to ask that question is undemocratic because maybe 2/3 of the electorate doesn't agree with that. So why would you raise a bar when you don't even have the same level of voter support? It's a related but separate question. But I do think that even on a 55% vote threshold, let's run some rough math, right? In the year 2000, when I ran this bond measure, we had about 640,000 votes cast in the city of San Diego. My measure beat the no side by 100,000 votes. It was something around 360 to 260 was sort of how it shook out, but that was just 57%. So it still is incredibly reflective of what the will of the voters are when they say, yeah, we all want to chip in, we want to see more affordable housing. We would have close to 7,500 units of affordable housing either by 2024, doors open, or under construction right now, but for that threshold. We had an affordable housing question in the Bay Area, a $20 billion bond that local officials up there wanted to be able to move forward. They decided just at the last second in August to not move that forward because they were uncertain they were really hinging on Prop 5 passing, and they need to know that. It's a lot of investment to run a campaign on a very contentious issue when it comes to revenues. You want to do it right, but not knowing what that threshold is preventing us from being able to even put these questions before to the voters.
Is it undemocratic?
I think that the 2/3 vote threshold on property taxes and bonds is very democratic. And the reason why that is a protection that we all get to enjoy on frivolous projects not being approved. And I'll even share with the process of Prop 5, the way that Prop 5 came together, actually even itself underscores the importance of the 2/3 supermajority. So when Prop 5 was originally proposed last year in 2023, it included lowering the vote threshold for bonds, which it currently does, but it also had in the original proposal lowering the vote threshold for special taxes. And so that would be either your local city being able to raise your sales tax or coming up with a parcel tax or some kind of other tax. Well, the very smart and highly paid consultants that make a lot of money off these propositions on the ballot recognized last year or earlier this year that proposition wasn't going to pass with that lowering the threshold of the special taxes. So the proposition was amended later this year, or earlier in this year in 2024, actually towards the end of the session, almost at the end of at the deadline, and took that out, the 2/3 lowering that to 55% for special taxes, because the political consultants knew that it wasn't going to pass. So what does that mean for a 2/3 specifically bill tax proposal versus a 55%? What that means is these consultants, again, make a lot of money, they're very smart, and they know how to predict voter behavior, right? They know how to do polling, they know how to do segments with roundtables with folks to get their opinions, and that's how all of these come together. Every time there's a proposal on the ballot to do a bond, all of this research goes into it before it goes on to the ballot. So when you have a 2/3 ballot, the political consultants know they have to work a little bit harder, they have to be a little bit more honest, they have to have a little bit more scrutiny, they have to have a little bit more accountability than to convince 55% of the voters to approve something. So the 2/3 ballot, or the 2/3 approval rate is very democratic.
You said that it's a protection against frivolous projects. Is affordable housing a frivolous project?
I would say that affordable housing is not a frivolous project, but we have to look at why are we in this situation in California in the first place that we're talking about affordable housing. Why is housing unaffordable in California? Well, part of the reason is in San Diego specifically, this is one of the best places in the world to live, right? Not just in California, not just in the United States, but San Diego is one of the most sought after places to live in the world. I think there was an article a couple weeks ago that it's the most one of the most unaffordable places, top 10 unaffordable places in the world. So first thing is, a lot of people want to move here. Second thing is, government has already caused most of the problems that deal with affordability in housing. The San Diego BIA did a study a couple of years ago, and I don't remember if it was 20% or 40%, it's somewhere in there, that the cost of housing in San Diego is, whatever the number was in that range, high because of government overregulation, government zoning, and government interference with the market in driving up the cost of housing in San Diego. Now, it's not just San Diego, it's across the entire state of California. Housing is unaffordable in California because of government intervention with the free market and allowing the developers to build in a timely fashion. What's one of the main reasons for that? CEQA, the Environmental Quality Act of California, is no longer an Environmental Quality Act. It's now a Attorney Employment Act. And basically what happens is when developers are proposing projects anywhere in the state, a environmental group can sue that developer for whatever thing that they find in error in their EIR, Environmental Impact Report. And what that does, two things. It delays the project and makes the project more expensive. And then the environmental group gets their payoff either from the developer or from the local agency that's approving the development. And then they go away and then the project still gets built. That's the bottom line with these environmental lawsuits against projects in California. The project is still going to get built. I guess the best example of that right now that we all might be familiar with is the convention center in Chula Vista. Remember several years ago, the supposed environmental group, Center for Biological Diversity, which is, again, just a high-paid law firm, found a way to sue the developer, and all it did was delay the project and make it more expensive. So we have to look at that. I kind of went off on a tangent here a little bit. Bring me back to the point that you were asking at the beginning.
Well, I'm going to ask a follow-up.
Oh, frivolous. Or is it frivolous?
Yeah.
So the other aspect of that is government should not be building housing. The government should be getting out of the way to allow the developers to be building housing, let the market and private investment take the risk on developing the project. Government should not be taking our tax dollars and buying property and owning and developing affordable housing.
Do you agree with that?
No. There's a lot to talk about there. A couple of things. I think some of you know I also have the privilege of serving as the Assembly's housing chair. So we have been more aggressive in zoning reforms, in streamlining questions, yes, in reducing CEQA. Last year, we sent 18 bills to the governor's desk on streamlining CEQA. He signed all 18 of those. So I'm very proud of the record that we've actually started here in San Diego to try to be able to
Most of those
relax.
are bipartisan.
That's true. No, absolutely. And to his credit, by the way, it's taken bipartisan support to be able to get some of this through because we've got a lot of Democrats in Los Angeles that haven't always found political will. We're finding more, and more people are coming on board the housing train. That's great. So thank you for that, Brian. But when I think about, all the infrastructure that we're talking about and all these frivolous projects, this would include water infrastructure, fire stations, road repairs. Again, these are physical things, not salaries that the community is asking for and demanding for. And so if we're trying to turn the trends around from what we have to work with today and project to have to work with forward and be able to add on top of that as well, you have to have new tools in the toolbox. And this still requires a greater than majority vote, right? Significantly so in something the size of the city of San Diego. It's interesting because despite all of the requirements that are in Prop 5 on accountability, on making sure that expenditure plan is adequately under audit exercised, as we told the voters that it would. All of these are significantly higher thresholds than general tax raises enjoy. A 50%, a clean majority, right? Or if you do a citizens initiative through the Upland example, that also requires 50% plus one, with none of these accountability standards built in. So we're trying to meet the moment of what the demands are and allow, again, this is all optional. This is not something that will change the game. All it does is really test what the threshold is going to be. Then the decision is up to local voters, because I think Senator and I would also agree, Sacramento can't solve all these problems. And every community's needs are different. And so why not give a community more tools in the toolbox to be able to decide for themselves what that program of expenditures needs to be for public facilities?
Great question. Why not give local communities the opportunity to decide this for themselves?
I think, well, we were giving them the opportunity to decide this for themselves. Absolutely, 100%. And it goes back to the 2/3 vote requirement to get there, right? And so I want to, on the infrastructure projects that we're discussing, fire stations, libraries, roads, bridges, those kind of things, the opponents of Prop 5 are not against those projects. What they're saying is those projects are expensive. If you're going to bond finance them, which is the most expensive way to pay for government, is to go into debt and then pay back the interest. So, for example, on the two bonds that are on the statewide ballot right now, 2 and 4, they're both $10 billion asks to go for the state to go into debt. It's going to cost $8 to $9 billion extra over the next 30 to 40 years to pay those off. Well, it's similar at the local level too. If you live in a city that does a bond financing on a project, and you also have a school district that does a bond financing on a project, and then you also have a water district that does a bond financing on a project. Now you've got 3 additional expense lines on your property tax bill to pay back those bonds over 30 to 40 years. So the question is kind of false leading in that to say we're not giving the voters a choice. We are giving the voters a choice. But what we're saying is those projects, fire station, water line, pipelines, roads, bridges, whatever the permanent infrastructure is, should be so important and so necessary that a supermajority of voters think it's worth going into debt for. That's what the choice is here.
I want to pivot back to affordable housing, because I think here in San Diego, that's probably the most germane of what this proposition could lead to, right? How urgent is the need for affordable housing? Put this into perspective for us, and I'd like both of you to tackle.
I think we both agree it's incredibly urgent. And we're not too far off, I think, on different approaches on what we need to do to be able to allow the market to be able to build more units and really meet the demand that's out there. You talked about how wildly popular San Diego is. Yes, we're in high demand. That is absolutely factoring into the pricing and the cost that is stressing families out. But what we do disagree on is this need that that local or state or federal government, the government, doesn't have a role to play to be able to support more affordable housing. Look, if you go back 80 years, the ability of the federal government to make a major investment in housing nationwide and send that to the states and send that to the local governments did help to produce some stock. Not all those were run well, and some of them, frankly, turned into slums. And so that tide turning right now, a lot of that level of support fell off. The state has not made major investments until just about 6 or 7 years ago, when we started to have better budgets and were able to make that a priority choice in the work that we were doing. And local governments from time to time will find the match philanthropy will jump in. But you're never going to be able to meet for the affordability that we have for anybody less than middle income. You're never going to have the housing stock that we do need for young professionals and service workers and others that are not yet at that middle income. They need that housing unit, and you're not going to be able to meet the housing stock without subsidy or without some kind of bridge subsidy, right? And that's where government comes in. The city of San Diego is not out there breaking ground on a new housing development, right? Of course, they contract with a private developer, somebody that specializes in affordable housing development. But that affordable housing developer has a real complicated math to be able to sift through, to be able to find the financing, to reduce risk, to be able to see how they can actually piece 8 different sources together. And yes, one of those sources is how much is the public able to chip in as well, too. So it is going to be a necessary part. To what degree? that is up for debate, but not having extra tools in the toolbox to allow us to do that is going to make it take longer for us to be able to eventually meet the affordable housing need that we have.
One of the arguments of this is that government should solve this problem, right, of affordable housing, which Assemblyman Ward is correct. Government does have a role. And there are some things that are moving forward that he mentioned, obviously, is the CEQA reforms and some of the zoning reforms that have passed over the last 5 years and 6 years, carried both in the Assembly and the Senate, that have made a significant difference in what can and where it can be built in California. One of the things that we've seen here in San Diego over the last 5 or 6 years is a huge influx of 5, 6, 7, 8-story apartment buildings, complexes being built. All I do is drive down Highway 8 between here and East County, and on both sides of the freeway, where there used to be car dealerships, there's now apartments and condos. Farther east on Fairmont, underneath the trolley, which was proposed to do, there's more apartment complexes being there. Farther east in La Mesa, next to Alvarado Hospital, there's 10,000 apartment units coming online in San Diego over the course of the next 3 or 4 years or something like that. And so what's been the result of that? Well, finally, rental rates in San Diego have leveled off. I saw an article last week where they might even be coming down 1%. Now, look, 1% is not a lot at the rate they are right now, right? But at least we've stopped the increase, which is very important. And that was a government role. Government zoned these apartments. Private enterprise, private developers built them and are either selling them or renting them out. When it comes to affordable housing and local jurisdictions being responsible for buying and owning those projects, I want you to, before I get to that point, tools in the toolbox was mentioned. I used to serve on the city council in Santee, and we approved 2 low-income housing projects while I was on the city council there. And there's lots of tools in the toolbox for these developers to get these projects built without local government funding. And what are those tools? There's tax credits that they take advantage of at the federal level, and they get a bunch of other financing deals on these projects. One of the incredible things when we were approving those projects that I learned was these affordable housing projects, when they're going through the approval process, employ more attorneys than they do construction workers. So it was just a phenomenon when I experienced that. But going back to local jurisdictions owning the projects, owning and developing them. Think about every government agency that you're familiar with. DMV, City Hall, Caltrans, EDD, Department of Justice. Do you name it? Just pick one. How efficient and effective are they? How responsive to your phone call are they? How quickly do they get back to your email when you email them with a problem that you personally have and need solved? Maybe you didn't get your unemployment check and it got tied up and you need to get your unemployment check and you email EDD to get it. Well, you might get a response from them in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Or you have a DMV problem. Now, I will say DMV has cleaned up their act quite a bit in the last several years. But government is not efficient. Government is not fast. And it's not designed to be, by the way. I mean, there's not a criticism of government. Government is not creative. It's not thinks outside the box for the most part. And so that's why I believe it's inappropriate for government to own and develop these projects and take your tax dollars, the money out of your pocket, to put at risk to invest, and maybe the project works and maybe the project doesn't work. That's why developers put a lot of money on the line to build these projects. And sometimes they make money. Sometimes they make a lot of money. But a lot of times they don't make money or they lose money.
So what are the other options for local governments to get these kind of projects done if Prop 5 doesn't pass, if it's not easier to borrow money?
I'm glad you asked that question, because one thing that comes at us often is the conversation around impact fees. And that is really what cities are relying on to be able to meet that next community park, eventually build that new, revamp that fire station, whatever that impact is. And you figure out, and there's, a very, very strong governance around how we calculate on a new development, what their share of a community impact fee would be. And of course, with development, we hate it because that just adds cost to the total cost of development that is ultimately passed on to a purchaser or a renter. And you're in this, really, lose-lose situation here. Do we want to make housing more costly? No. But do I want to take away that last tool that we can to be able to eventually someday, maybe in 30 years, build the thing that the community's been asking for? But back to the conversation around bonding and the fact that is this the way or the right mechanisms to go? Again, it's a question that ultimately that's not what Prop 5 does. It's a threshold question. Ultimately, that comes back to the voters, and they would have to decide for themselves, just like they decide for themselves today on school bond facilities. What they don't decide for themselves, is on, say, water bonds. Right? If you need to build more water infrastructure, that revenue is coming in. You can use a revenue bond. It's also going to be subject to the same eventual escalation of costs, right? That comes with borrowing debt over time. But for this myriad of new public infrastructure that people want now, they want it yesterday. There's nothing today that's with impact fees, for example, that is going to be able to produce that so readily. And we can have that now with the conscientious knowledge that this is going to be on the rolls for the next 30 or 40 years for us to be able to pay off.
What other options are there?
Well, I think we've kind of thoroughly discussed the other options, and the other options are to increase zoning, which is being done across the state in some cities that haven't wanted to do that because of state law.
But is that enough? Are we seeing enough change to address this?
The change is happening slowly. In some areas, like San Diego, I think San Diego's done a very good job of increasing their zoning in several areas. And look, some of the neighborhoods don't like that, right? You've lived in a quiet bungalow neighborhood in San Diego for 30 or 40 years, and now all of a sudden your neighbor's building 4 apartment units in their backyard. There's some tension there, right, between the neighbors. But where San Diego has allowed increased density on bigger lots, I think that's a positive step in the right direction. When it comes back to affordable housing and middle-income housing, there's lots of tools in the toolbox that these developers can take advantage of, both at the federal level and the state level, to get these projects done. My argument would be that we need to do more to build more housing at the market rate, and so that we can stabilize the market. Right now in San Diego, the market is unstable. But again, we have to go back to where we live. People don't think about this very often, but San Diego is actually very similar to an island. And there's only so much land in San Diego County, right? We're bordered to the north by Camp Pendleton. We're bordered to the east by a desert. We're bordered to the south by another country. And we're bordered to the west by an ocean. So if you think about it, we really are an island here in San Diego County. And so obviously increasing zoning is going to help with that, and then streamlining and expediting approvals for things that do want to get built helps as well.
So proponents say that Prop 5 doesn't raise taxes, which is true technically because it's a threshold question. Is that a fair characterization, though?
Well, I think it is, given that it's unfair opposition point that this is going to raise taxes. So it in itself does not. It is addressing the threshold question, which is, of course, has, sort of secondary effect, right? What would this mean down the road? Yes, theoretically, and the Legislative Analyst's Office has also put out there that this could lead to the fiscal impact, increased property taxes over time. Also a true statement. But we're talking about what should that threshold be for some of the greatest community demands that are out there right now, right? At 2/3, it has been incredibly prohibitive to even see a future that would be able to deliver on the demands that we have today, let alone what we would hope to have for in the future. Tying this to something that voters have already approved seemed fair. And again, 55% is still a very strong supermajority. In the context of San Diego, why would you, if you had a question to the voters and 100,000 San Diego voters said yes, more voters said yes than no, and you said, sorry, that's still not enough. it's very difficult to see a future when we were ever going to have the political dynamic to be able to expand and meet the needs that we have today.
Let's be very clear on the purpose of Prop 5. Two things. Number one, it amends Prop 13. And what does that amendment do? It lowers the voter threshold. What's the purpose of lowering that voter threshold? 100%. The purpose of Prop 5 is to raise your taxes. There's no other purpose for Prop 5 other than to make it easier for irresponsible politicians, very aggressive and highly paid political consultants, and Wall Street bankers to take money out of your pocket and put it in their pocket. And then hopefully the project that they promised you might get built. Now, often it does get built, but a lot of times it gets built at a higher cost than they promised, and it takes longer to get done. And so we've all heard the term over budget and over time. And that's endemic of government projects. But look, I don't think we're debating on are some of these projects worthy to do. Yes, they are worthy to do. I think that's been my point from the beginning. But they should be so worthy to do that a supermajority of voters agree that it's important. To the point of a proposition or a initiative losing by a certain number of votes, I would argue that if the project was so important, so valuable, and so needed, that the political consultants should have worked a little bit harder to tell a little bit better story to get the few more votes they needed to get that proposition passed.
Right, but that comes back to what should that threshold be, and that you're going to tell that many more San Diegans that vote is still yet not enough. I think, again, ties it back to the central point here. Like, what is democratic, right? What's a fair and democratically target point for being able to decide this when you can have such a small minority of dissenters, continue to be able to obstruct these future opportunities. And I'm glad that Brian raised Proposition 13, because one of the biggest offenders, and we know this well, I know this well, being in the role of a state legislator, is the California Association of Realtors. If you even dance around if you have a bill that is even in the space of Prop 13, there's strong opposition. They've removed their opposition on this because they're also about building good community. And for a lot of the technical detail that we were able to improve upon ECA 1 through ECA 10 and another assembly bill, that opposition came off. It's a balance of issues here that we're always wrestling with, but I think that we've come forward to be able to put before voters in Proposition 5 is something that is targeted, that has a strong accountability built in, will result in local projects with local jobs attached to those, and is just a win-win-win on so many issues that it was tough to continue to oppose.
How would you?
I think I'm just going to end because Assemblyman Ward started his comments by saying right when he was talking about my comments. So I think I'll just close and no, I'm just kidding.
I think that's a technicality.
I know. I understand. I hope that underscores how well Assemblyman Ward and I get along. We actually do have a good time flying back and forth to Sacramento together. So yeah.
I don't want to know what you talk about on those plane rides. Tell us, how have the needs of Californians changed?
Well, can I address the Association of Realtors real quick? The California Association of Realtors, that's Assemblyman Ward. That is an important point, actually, that the realtors did withdraw their opposition to this bill, and that really is a big deal because they're a very powerful private property rights lobbying group in California who I'm typically aligned with. I'm actually a licensed real estate agent in California. I'm not a realtor because I worked in commercial real estate, and usually I'm aligned with them. I'm probably in the 90th percentile. On this issue, I think they're just dead wrong. And one of the things to consider on that is the San Francisco Chronicle also wrote an editorial in opposition to Prop 5 based on the exceptions that the realtors asked for in this proposition. So what did they ask for? The realtors asked to be included in the language of Prop 5 that if a locality approves a bond and the bond passes by the voters, there are certain areas of those jurisdictions that are excluded from development. And one of the examples is you can't tear down single-family homes and rebuild low to moderate housing on top of that piece of property. So the bond, while the proposition is making the argument, we're going to make it easier for localities to raise our taxes on our property tax bill, to spend money on these projects, and at the same time, it also restricts where those projects can be built.
Well, and I would just say there still is a lot of opportunity sites that would be available for affordable housing projects, particularly at a density that they should be for efficiency purposes. But I would have some reservation, having worked closely with the realtors and not always agreed with them on things. We have to, at the end of the day, agree to disagree and take a vote. But they don't want to be able to see a whole expansion of a lot more development without, I think, the commensurate community facilities that are going to be able to support great neighborhoods. Right? I believe them when I talk with my local realtors or with the representatives up in San Diego, Sacramento as well. I just kind of curious with this audience here. I'm wondering who out here is under the age of 63 or was not in California 45 years ago.
I think you're predicting my next question, which is how has the world changed since this supermajority was codified?
There you go. None of you ever had a say in this in the first place. None of you. The very, very few of you that didn't raise your hands haven't even had a chance to weigh in since Prop 13 was enacted in 1978. So this is a very targeted change to how we are able to pass opportunities that you are asking public local city governments to be able to do, special districts to do, and be able to still make sure that there is a significance enough of a supermajority that makes it defensible when we're thinking about changing something with regard to revenues.
What about concerns that have been raised by some taxpayers associations that higher property taxes could ultimately burden renters, could ultimately have unintended consequences in order to offset the higher property taxes that perhaps a landlord has to pay?
I mean, I think that if this is able to, one, help to produce more housing opportunities down the road, that should help to affect the supply-demand issues that we're having, which are also factoring into pricing. So it's all it's a little bit selective, I think, in their perspective. You really have to look at the totality of how a lot of these economics do shake out. But what it will offer, again, on a subsequent vote of local voters on a specific expenditure plan that they either are interested in or not, it will offer them the opportunity to be able to have more in the near future that they want to see. Go for it.
Yeah, and Assemblyman Ward asked for audience participation. I will do the same thing. How many of you think it's too expensive to live in San Diego County right now? And my hand is up, by the way, because I have 3 kids that are trying to buy homes and have jobs here in San Diego and stay in San Diego as well. Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. Every single one of us, whether you're a renter or not, is a property taxpayer. Just about every dollar you spend is tied to a property tax. If you're a renter, there's a property tax cost in the amount that you pay rent up. When you go to the grocery store and buy groceries, that grocery store pays property tax. When you go to the gas station and buy gas, that gas station pays property tax. When you go to your doctor and you have healthcare services, that doctor pays property tax. The more and more expensive we make it to live in San Diego, the more and more unaffordable it continues to get. And raising property taxes across the board increases the cost of every single item that we have to pay for in San Diego.
What I just observed too, though, is that renters, being a very strong part of our community, also benefit. They get the benefits of the new public projects that might come from this revenue source as well. So while it may not be their time to own a home and some choose to rent, they would want to have new parks facilities, an updated fire station, hospitals that are up to standards nearby. They're going to benefit just as equally as homeowners.
And under current law, we can do those things. We don't have to change the law to do those things.
Okay, first of all, keeping a running list of things that there's consensus on. So we have EVs, SOX, that we need more affordable housing, and that the city is too expensive, that the county is too expensive. So I want to know, to tackle that, as you oppose Prop 5, as you oppose largely bonds, I would think it's fair to say, what are the alternative viable solutions?
Well, let's start with, I think my position on affordable housing has been pretty clear on government owning that, right? I'm not saying government doesn't have a role, but on bonds financing, my vote on that is actually mixed. At the local level, in my community of Santee and East County, I have supported local bonds for the school district. I've supported local bonds for the hospital district. I've supported local bonds in a couple other situations as well. Now, I've also opposed bonds for those same districts as well. It goes back to how good of a story is the district telling, and how big is the need to get there, right? And if the need is big enough and the voters are convinced with an accurate telling story, they'll approve it and vote for it. And it goes back to, we need that level of accountability. We need that level of scrutiny that is required to convince the voters to approve something like that.
So we know historically people have a tendency to see higher property taxes, sometimes higher taxes, period, and say, absolutely not, shut it down, reject the premise. How do you appeal to people? How do you message about this?
That if this is something, again, you truly are interested in having more of today, that this is a mechanism that is, analogous to how we are able to fund school facilities. And often San Diego voters have been able to say yes. Maybe other districts have said no on something. But for the hard infrastructure that we want to see for our neighborhoods, again, I'm trying to be able to draw that parallel, because I would like to see a law that was updated in 2000 by voters be able to receive due consideration by voters in 2024 to meet today's needs, housing and infrastructure. And I think that they would say yes just on the threshold question, and then everything subsequent comes down to that local government. We saw last cycle sales tax measures across the county, city by city, going forward. And again, that's 50%, right? Lower threshold, no accountability, different jurisdictions. And some cities said yes, and some cities said no. But that's up to the local voters to decide for themselves what they want to be able to pay for within their jurisdiction. The same would still be here, with room to spare, with still a very strong supermajority threshold.
So the Vice President of Communications for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, which strongly opposes this, says Prop 5 is worse than a tax increase. Do you agree with that?
I hadn't heard that argument. Is that from Susan?
Yes.
Yeah. And I've done several interviews with her. I haven't heard her say that. But that is an interesting concept, actually. And I think I could agree with that, because why is it worse than a tax increase? If Proposition 5 was just a bond for the state of California to do these things that we're talking about today, it's a one-time thing, right? But what Proposition 5 is doing is opening the gate statewide that, again, irresponsible politicians, aggressive, greedy political consultants, and wealthy Wall Street bankers are going to take money out of your pocket and put it into their pocket for their kids to go to the colleges that they want to go to and do the things that they want to do, while you're on the hook for the next 30 or 40 years, and your kids are on the hook for the next 30 or 40 years to pay back these bonds. So, yeah, I think I could agree with that argument.
I appreciate you brought that up too, because, again, what else is also on our ballot in front of us, Props 2, Prop 4, can pass by a majority of California.
Well, this can too. I was going to bring that up too. Yes,
right,
so
but not if it's a local question, because they're subject to 2/3. Right. So yes, we can put that forward. I'm going to disagree with you on the nature of what goes in there with educational facilities, with the need that we have for water and climate-related issues under Proposition 4, and the need is great right now, and there isn't an expansion of tax under those propositions because, of course, we have to pay that back in future state budgets, which will be another debate we'll have. So I think that there's, again, you're starting to see this threshold question is not, I think, fairly aligned as far as how we make decisions, but it particularly hits local communities the hardest because of the standards that we are under today.
Very quickly, before we turn to audience questions, I want to know why you're each passionate enough about this to be here with us on a Saturday talking about a sole proposition for 75 minutes.
Because the voice of San Diego asked.
That's it.
No, it's because this will be, Prop 5 is it being a threshold question, determines so much possibility or not in the future. I mentioned the Bay Area example. They decided to not move forward on $20 billion of affordable housing, local dollars, right, up there that only they would be subject to because of the uncertainty around this question. They were not going to put it for, they don't think that that 2/3 is feasible, so it's just a fool's errand to even try to campaign for that. But 55%, they think Bay Area voters could be persuaded. And not knowing what the outcome is, it was just premature for them to be able to move forward. That's a delay in affordable housing.
So I want to expand on his first answer because I agree with him on that. And so when I got elected to the Assembly in 2010, one of the most disappointing things about our government process in California was the media was absent from Sacramento. At that point in time, the Union Tribune, the older Union Tribune, before 2010 had 2 full-time reporters in Sacramento just to cover Sacramento for San Diego. When I got there, they were down to 1.5, they said. And then within 6 months, that person, the one, retired. They were down to 1/2. And then 6 months later, they had none. And I have been, since 2010, screaming from the rooftops to the local media here in San Diego, you have to cover Sacramento. You have to tell San Diegans what's going on in Sacramento. And it's been very frustrating for me as somebody who is in government, but also wants government to be held accountable. Even as elected officials, I expect to be held accountable by the press, by the media, by the voters. And that just wasn't there. And so my answer is similar to Chris's, is I was asked. The Voice of San Diego has done a very good job of being on the scene the last 2 to 3 years and starting to cover Sacramento a little bit more. When I heard that you were the moderator, you're doing a great job at NBC covering it from the local perspective on the media. So, and there's several other local groups here in San Diego that have stepped up over the last couple of years to start doing what I've been wanting the press to do. Take advantage of your First Amendment right. We have a freedom of the press. The press should be covering what's going on. So that's why I'm here.
Well, we're all very glad that you're here. Tell my bosses they need to start sponsoring trips up to Sacramento.
I've been arguing for that as well. I'll give you a tour.
I'll take it. Okay, let's turn to audience questions.
Yeah, thank you for the plug, Senator. We do have a Capitol Reporter, our Sacramento report written by Deborah Brennan, which
She's doing a
story
great job.
too. Yeah. Thank you. So our first question today will be asked by Edmund Buenaviente, if you want to come up. He's an Aaron Price Fellow and one of the many students today participating.
Thank you again. For those who don't know me, I'm Edmund Buenaviente. I'm a senior. I'm in 12th grade at Morse High School. So, assuming this proposition is approved, the approval guidance likely be reduced. Like I said, with the constraint or. Sorry, but assuming approval guidelines are reduced with the passing of Proposition 5, more projects will likely be done together. So my question for both of you is, given our limited resources and budget for multiple plans, how will the government be able to allocate enough resources for each task for everything to be completed in an efficient and timely manner?
Well, I think I understood your question. Again, it's Proposition 5 passing, not would, but could allow local governments a little bit more room to be able to realize the future for what they're proposing to voters, right? If you want sooner to be able to have more of this deficit fixed, we have an answer here, but we first have to unlock this question about what it should take to be able to pass these kind of measures for local voters to be able to consider. So I think so it's a threshold question. What would the capacity, I guess, of local governments be to be able to fund or make these kinds of decisions about what to put forward? Again, that's going to come down to that very specific question, right? Would a future question propose, $2 billion of infrastructure or $500 million, and on what? And what would the repayment schedule kind of look like? That would all be something that would be handled or sort of crafted in the development of that specific proposal, which of course would be put forward to voters. And if it's something that was too excessive, too egregious, too open to pet projects and fraudulent activity, whatever you want to debate about that question at that time, that's for the voters to decide at that time.
I think we've all agreed that it's already expensive to live in California and in San Diego specifically, and sources are limited, especially local sources as well. But to buy into the concept that you can tax yourself into wealth or into prosperity, you've got to really have some funky economics education to get to that point. And there's a great quote by Winston Churchill that says, We contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself by the handle. We can't tax ourselves into prosperity. And so I hope that answers the question.
Okay, this is a good accountability question. We didn't elaborate too much on that. So this person says they used to support tax increases, but the elected officials in San Diego who purchased 101 Ash Street and in East Village something in the East Village to give away tax-funded money to Republican friends gives this person untrust in San Diego to manage tax dollars. So can you elaborate a little bit on the measures that are baked into this?
Okay, so if you are crafting something in the future that would allow a Prop 5 55% threshold to qualify for passage of that local measure, that's what you're designing. You have to come up with a project expenditure plan. You have to have a citizens oversight committee, right? And forgot to mention that earlier, I sat on one of those for the community college district. Great facilities. I mean, we've got a strong system here that is educating our young professionals very well through those new developments that the voters approved. And
2/3?
No, that was a 55%. It's a school bond, right? And so, but you see what's happening in Mesa and City and Miramar, and these are great facilities that are, again, for many of our students, that's the way. And they're able to get that great education in a great environment, but that never would have been there were not for the measure in 2000 and our willingness. But that came with accountability and oversight to look at each of those projects. Is it staying on time? Is it staying on budget? And we largely saw that, almost exclusively saw that it was. So, and then it goes further. It requires the state auditor to review annually how these measures are being implemented. So there are layers of accountability structures that are built into Prop 5 should any local question exercising Prop 5 in the future want to be able to enjoy.
Does any of that give you peace of mind?
No. And very simply, on the state, let's go backwards. On the state auditor question, the state auditor, and I hope Assemblyman Reward would agree with me, does a great job in California. But the state auditor is responsive to what we call JLAC, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, and that's made up of both Democrats and Republicans, both assembly members and senators that sit on a joint committee, and that committee approves a dozen, maybe 24 audits a year, right? And that's what the auditor that's their staffing level right now. And it's a lot of work to do one of these audits. I have an audit that was approved a year and a half ago. Assemblymember Alvarez here in San Diego is the chair of the committee. Are you on the committee?
I'm not.
Okay. He and I worked together to get this audit approved on the sexually violent predator program in California because it's broken. But that was 18 months ago. We got that approval on that audit. That's about how long these audits take, 18 to 24 months when they're looking at these big departments. The auditor is not staffed to do all of these audits for all of these bonds that are going to, and trust me, if this passes, there will be an explosion of local bonds over the next 4 to 8 years on the ballot across the state. Hundreds of billions of dollars of debt that the Californians will be put into because of Prop 5 passing. Now, let's talk about the audit oversight committees. I'm glad Assemblyman Reward brought that up. I'm going to do another audience participation. Who else has ever served on a bond oversight committee? Have you really? Excellent. Okay. So we got 3 people. All right. So you're a student representative on a bond oversight? Okay. So, 3 out of however many are here.
It's Politifest. You should have expected.
There's 4. So, but the point I'm driving at is these bond oversight committees sound great on paper. They sound great when they're in the proposal of the bond that's being passed and voted on. But what happens after it's passed is it's very difficult to get people to serve on these bond oversight committees. It's people don't want to give up an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours once a month to go sit in a boring meeting talking about financial statements and bond oversight. Now, obviously, there's a few people that enjoy doing that. But oftentimes, these bond oversight committees are staffed either by local politicians or friends of the politicians or the developer or friends of the developer or bureaucrats or friends of the bureaucrats. Now, every once in a while, you get a great bond oversight committee. But the San Diego Union Tribune, in writing against Prop 5, recognized that oftentimes there's not enough authority on these bond oversights to make a difference. The media doesn't pay attention to the bond oversight committees. And the San Diego Union Tribune, in writing against, in opposition to Prop 5, pointed out that when there is a reportable incident, it's usually from a whistleblower that's involved in the project somewhere and not the actual bond oversight committee.
We talked about this a little bit, but I want to circle back to it because I do think it is central to what's being asked of voters here. This person wants to know, in a democracy, the majority should rule, so why should bonds require 66%? That lets a 34% majority rule.
That's the question of Prop 5.
Yeah, I think that's what we're...
Exactly. I mean, it's, if you really, for all the other noise, all the other arguments, which are fair to sort of, say, how might this subsequently play out? The question is very simple in front of you. Should this be something that should be changed for our greatest community needs that are out there right now? Or should, we continue to be at the will of 34% of the voters? And what would the future look like? You know what you're getting today. You know sort of the trend lines that we've been on right now. Do you want to change those trend lines? And, to your point earlier, if we're seeing an explosion of all of these audits coming out here, I think that's a great thing because that means there's an explosion of affordable housing and community infrastructure and other things actually starting to happen.
I guess I didn't underscore my concern about that. As more bureaucrats employed by the state of California, that increases the expense of doing these projects. I'm sorry, what was why 2/3 versus 50%, right? The majority should rule, which is a good argument. But we're not electing a mayor or a city council member. They will be up for re-election in 2 or 4 years. We're not electing an assembly member. We're not electing a senator. We're not electing a governor that have to stand for re-election in 2 or 4 years or however long their term is, right? We're voting on putting ourselves in debt for the next 20, 30, or 40 years. And we're voting on a project that is either necessary or not necessary, depending on the opinions of the voters. So when you are approving something that has long-term effects and putting your children in debt, if you're going to have kids in the next 20, 30, or 40 years, should require a higher level of scrutiny.
You touched on this at the beginning, but are there provisions in Prop 5 that restrict the use of money for infrastructure and not for general operations?
Absolutely. Yeah, no payroll can be used for it. There is a cap on 5% of the cost for administrative expenses that are reasonable and necessary as you're doing what you need to for bond management, all the fiscal side of things. But this is really for hard cost money to be able to do things in our community, for you to see things happen in your community that otherwise don't have that availability given today's constraints.
The problem is that what is defined as an infrastructure project is so broadly, the definition is so broad that you can put almost any kind of project into that definition. So, for example, if your favorite city councilman, who we both have been, has a park idea and they want to build a park that they can put their name on, well, guess what? That qualifies as a project under the infrastructure in this proposition.
I'm not sure that's the case because you have to set up your expenditure plan at the same time as you're putting that question before the voters. So you know you're going to get these facilities. I don't think you get to add on pet projects after the fact.
No, I agree. That's probably true. No, but you can the park project can be in the plan,
Right.
as it's approved. And is that is it okay? Let's say the bond financing that is going to the voters is going to build an affordable housing project that everybody agrees, or 55% of the folks agree we need. But slipped into that is some other facilities that we may or may not, that maybe more than half the people don't think is necessary. When the political consultants are presenting this bond financing idea to the voters, they're only going to talk about the affordable housing project that is popular and necessary. They're not going to talk about the things that are slipped into the project or into the proposal on the ballot, which will get by a lot of the voters.
Quickly, I know we don't have a lot of concrete numbers. There's nothing quantitative we can really offer because it depends on what the bond being presented should Prop 5 pass.
I have a couple of numbers I can present that are concrete.
Okay, maybe you can work those into your answer. Let me ask the question first. Are we anticipating that the effect of higher taxes as a result of a bond, should it pass, would be evenly spread, or could some taxpayers end up paying more than others, is this question?
It's a parcel tax.
Well, it would be, it's a property tax increase. So it's a bill on your property tax bill that's specific to this bond. So whatever that's divided in the city or district that it's in is going to be divided however they decide.
So many dollars and cents per cent.
So everybody, the bottom line goes back to my original point. Everybody pays. The two concrete numbers I wanted to share is $100 billion and $27 billion. $100 billion was the state surplus just 2 years ago. And the majority party and the governor spent all of that money, $100 billion. And this year, where the debate is between $58 and $72 billion in deficit. So in just 2 years in California, we've gone from a $100 billion surplus to a $27 billion, or 72 or 58, whatever number you want to use for the deficit. The $27 billion number is the amount of money California has wasted on homeless housing projects in the last 4 to 8 years that has been unaccountable. The governor can't answer, nobody in his administration can answer where that $27 billion went. And he actually vetoed a bill that would have asked for some accountability on those numbers.
You look like you want a chance to respond.
I mean, that's going to take us another 75 minutes. Well, let's go back to your question, because I would otherwise start going on sort of where he ended.
I was just trying to see how disciplined he is. He's doing pretty good.
It's true. And I know you'd be able to work those numbers in. Is the effect of this potential bond spread evenly for taxpayers?
Well, I guess we both kind of
yes, it is. Did you put that on your list of things that we agree on?
Oh, let me add it right now.
Not to leave some of those points unresponded. The only very quick response I would just say is, your state revenues, have gone on wild swings for a whole lot of reasons. No, we did not spend down everything. We built up record reserves, which we were able to use in part to be able to solve some of this year's challenges that we've had and be able to make some hard decisions about cuts. Yes, Democrats made cuts this year for multi-year commitments that we previously had wanted to be able to see, but it's just not there in the near future, and worked on the structural deficit. So next year's state budget is not projected to be as a dire situation. So it was responsible. It certainly is accountable. I know you didn't vote for it, but we did what we needed to do in the moment.
Just to wrap things up in a nice bow, let's circle back to that question we posed at the beginning when we said we could have called this a whole bunch of things. For everyone here, if they're leaving and they're thinking and percolating about what Prop 5 is, how do you define that for them in a sentence or two?
So all this is a threshold question. It doesn't on itself raise any new taxes. This is something that asks you about what your opinion is on a democratically acceptable threshold for a local government, what might be different for what San Francisco wants to see, or CNT, or the city of San Diego, really should come back down to what the willingness of their local voters want in the form of future proposals. And so how difficult should it be to be able to provide the community infrastructure that we're living with the deficit that we have? That's the question. Should we keep that difficulty level at 2/3, 67%? Or is 55% a strong enough threshold like we are enjoying for school facilities, which have an 80% passage rate statewide over the years? Still, 20% of local voters said, no, I don't think that I want to be able to support it. And hopefully be able to correct this trajectory that we've been experiencing of reduced infrastructure that we have to turn that trend line around. So it's a democracy question, it's a fairness question, it is a question about the viability for the future that you want to see for your own community and no one else's.
I'm sorry, did you say these are our closing comments? Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. So, a couple of points on that is, well, first of all, I'm having fun, and I knew being up here with Assemblymember Ward would be fun, but serious at the same time, right? So in opposition to Prop 5, I would encourage all of you to read the Union Tribune editorial and the San Francisco Chronicle editorial, because they both come at it at different angles of why to vote no on Prop 5. But as I said earlier, Prop 5 argues against itself when we're talking about higher voter thresholds. Keep in mind that Prop 5 only has to pass by 50% statewide to make these changes. But last year, when Prop 5 included the element of the special taxes also being lowered to 55%, the political consultants and the politicians figured out the voters weren't going to vote for that. So they had to remove that out of there so they could get to 50%. And they're still not sure they're going to get to 50%. I think it's hinging on how good of an argument I make today on whether it passes statewide. I'm just kidding. No, not that. Could go down to a few votes. Yeah, it probably will be down to a few votes. But Prop 5 argues against itself on how important this 2/3 threshold is. But what I want you to think about is in regarding government, especially any government, local government, state government. Think about Jabba the Hutt. I want you to think is local government as Jabba the Hutt. And Jabba the Hutt is sitting on his dais eating those frogs, right? As fast as he can. Jabba the Hutt that's your local government. Any government just wants to eat and eat and eat and consume and consume and consume. And those little frogs that are going in Jabba the Hutt's mouth are our tax dollars, right? And there's no limit to how much of our tax dollars Jabba the Hutt is going to eat if we don't stop Jabba the Hutt. Voting no on Prop 5 is our opportunity to stop Jabba the Hutt from eating all of our tax dollars. Vote no on Prop 5.
Okay, if you'd put it into Percy Jackson terms instead of Star Wars, I would have let you keep going. But we need to wrap up now, and this is much nicer than my producers yelling in my ear, so thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone learned something, has a lot to go home and ruminate on, and that you'll spend the next couple of weeks thinking solely about Prop 5.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our wonderful moderator. Our last session with our keynote speaker is happening in this room. If you're a nerd, you know who he is. If you're not, it's David Wasserman. He's the senior editor and election analyst at the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, an NBC contributor. Thanks for coming.
Next time. We'll see you on the next one. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. And I was serious about both of you on my comments about the president.